PokeClass is sponsored by Collector's Cash, your #1 online store for all you need for the Pokemon trading card game. They always have the cards you need at great prices, even the ones that are hard to find anywhere else. Make sure you check them out for all your singles, packs, boxes, accessories, and cards from other games at www.collectorscash.com. Welcome to PokeClass episode 36, where we are only 2 weeks away from this year's World Championships in San Diego. For those of you that already have your invites, you should already be on the verge of cracking your list and your deck choice for the tournament, with the only thing left to do being testing, and more testing. That being said, I've done a bit of discussion already about the possible metagame for Worlds, with next week I'm saving for the last minute rundown of what to expect. But what about those of you that haven't quite got your invite but are still going down to compete in the Last Chance Qualifier? Well, this week it's all about how to make a good choice for the Last Chance Qualifier, as well as how to approach your testing for the event. There wasn't a whole load of news this week for the TCG, so let's get straight into the episode. Last Chance Qualifiers, more commonly known as grinders, held the day before the official Worlds event and are designed to give players one last chance to grab one of about 8 invites to play the next day. In past years, the event was like any normal tournament. You had the Swiss rounds, then cut to the top performers until those last few remained and were allowed to access the following day's event. However, this year they've shook things up a bit and decided to change the tournament format to a best of 3 single elimination style. This means that one loss of a match drops you out of the tournament entirely, so there's a lot more at stake when you sit down at the tables when you're thrown in at the deep end. So how can you prepare for this style of play? Let's have a look. Best of 3 is usually played between 40 minutes and 1 hour rounds, meaning that you have to fit in 2 or 3 games into that fairly short time limit. That isn't a whole lot of time to work with, so you're definitely going to need to practice your match play every time you test. Playing without a time limit and just using single games is common when you're testing, but playing best of 3 brings another skill to the table. You're going to need to learn when a match isn't winnable and scoop to the next game for any chance of bringing a comeback. When learning when to concede a game, you should first consider these few things. First, assess the field and your hand to see how much control your opponent has and whether you feel you can turn it around with what you're given. You may just need a single card to do it, but that card could never come, so the best thing to do would be to concede the game and go for the next one. Second, stay aware of the game time through every stage of the game. This is not only good practice in general, but since the rules state that you need to take at least 4 prizes in the following games of best of 3 for it to count, you need to be assessing whether you have enough time to even attempt that before conceding. In an hour's game, I would suggest that you assess this by the half-hour mark at the latest. This will give you enough time to restart the game and start taking those 4 prizes. Some would even suggest thinking about scooping before this. This is probably one of the hardest things to do in match play, since a game is still winnable no matter how well it goes in the early stages. But hanging on to a tough game probably isn't the best idea if you feel you're struggling to keep up. What's best is to assess how far behind you're falling and make your decision from there. Is your opponent a couple of prizes ahead and they have a strong field, or do they just have that one attacker you need to get past to take control? The choice is unfortunately up to you. These are pretty much the 2 main things to consider when deciding whether to play out the game or not, before moving on to the next one to try and stay in it. It's a very hard skill to perfect and will only come with experience, so make sure you practice this with your testing buddies as it will help you out a ton, not only in grinders, but with match play in general. Just as a small note, making sure you practice match play makes sure that you're making the correct decision both when going first and when going second. Starting in either of these positions is incredibly different when deciding your plan of action or even selecting your starting Pokemon. For example, starting with a baby Pokemon isn't going to be great if you know you're going second after the first game, since the loser gets to choose. Simple decisions like this really become natural when practicing match play during testing. So now you know how to play during match play, but what deck should you play and what should influence your choice? This year, the grinders are going to be as big as previous years in terms of attendance, but the single elimination is definitely a factor you need to consider when choosing a deck. What you should be looking for first is consistency. Having a deck that can serve you well in every single game is going to be one of the key aspects of the decks that go far. One unlucky game can ruin your chances of going all the way through the tournament, since 2 losses in a row and it's game over. Decks like Stage 1 Rush really does have a chance of going far in this kind of format, simply because it has a more than reliable setup, can take really quick KOs, and has fair matchups across the board. If you're thinking of taking a slower deck such as Magnabore, you could be running into some issues when luck isn't on your side when you most need it. Following on from that, I would also suggest that you keep your deck list as simple as possible. Single elimination is no place to start bringing multiple one-off techs into your list, since it's going to sacrifice your consistency and slow you down where you really need to keep up. So I would suggest you think twice before adding loads of tech Pokemon for different matchups, and just try to keep your trainer and supporter lines as simple as you can. Keeping a lot of hand refresh such as Juniper and Pont will keep you as consistent as possible every round, whereas having one-off trainers such as Twins and the odd Super Scoop Up might not be the best play for this format of tournament. The final factor you need to consider when choosing a deck is how many difficult matchups it has and whether it's going to be a popular choice. For example, a deck featuring a strong lightning weakness such as Kingdra Yanmega is going to struggle against Zekrom, so you need to assess how popular feel the deck is going to be before you stick with that choice. This is why I feel that Stage 1 Rush is going to be a strong deck choice. It has no blatant weakness and doesn't have a particular matchup it's going to struggle against. So if your deck has a really bad matchup against anything with Yanmega, then I'd probably keep that deck for a later date. So in summary, these are the top tips I have for doing well in grinders. Number 1. Practice your match play as much as possible and make sure you keep track of time during each game you play. This will improve your performance in a format of tournament most of us aren't that familiar with. Number 2. Learn when to concede a game to preserve time for a comeback. Losing the first game in a best of 3 really isn't the end of the road. Make sure you concede in good time if you foresee the loss, but keep your spirits high going into the next 2 games. Playing with confidence is a huge aspect of doing well. Number 3. Choose a deck that matches this type of tournament play. Staying consistent is your main priority, and make sure that your deck isn't the one that fails you when you're feeling you're playing at your best. Keeping your deck list simple will help this, and make sure you know the list inside out so that you can play your best when your deck gives you what you need. Number 4 is one I'm going to add on, and that's to stay as prepared as you possibly can as a human being, rather than a player before the tournament. Stamina is going to be a huge aspect of going far, and making sure you're in the appropriate physical condition to play in the long grinders, and then in the biggest tournament of the year the next 2 days, will determine how well you do. Things like getting a large amount of rest before the weekend, and keeping healthy during the tournament in terms of food and drink, keeps you in peak physical condition to rack your brains for 3 days straight. There'll be nothing worse than coming to your last game in grinders and making silly misplays just because you're tired. Number 5 is a final note, and is a question I've seen a lot in the community for testing in general. How many games should I be playing a day in the run up to a big tournament? There isn't a definite answer to this, but 5 to 10 games a day is going to be perfect for getting to know the ins and outs of your own deck, as well as how to play against the majority of the metagame. Just remember to practice match play while you test. This will put you in the mindset of a tournament and get you to practice the tougher skills in Pokemon. So there you have it, my top tips to doing well in the grinders. For those of you looking for more advice on choosing your deck, along with some deck lists for both grinders and worlds, please stay tuned next week for a whole episode on that. Thanks for watching this week's episode of PokeClass. Make sure you subscribe and check out the website where I've made some great changes to PokeClass Extra. See you next week.